Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. So I appreciate the invitation to be here today, and Charlie's introduction actually gives me the opportunity as a Miami University of Ohio graduate to point out that my college was a university before Florida was a state. Just saying, just saying.
Touche.
So today I've been asked to talk about a very specific source of nutrient pollution, and that is the pollution that originates from stormwater runoff, and also the very urgent need that we have in the state of Florida to update our statewide stormwater rules that regulates how we design and permit stormwater systems. This has been a longstanding priority for the Conservancy, as Jennifer can tell you, of course, too. This has been a priority for over a decade, and we're really thrilled to see that there's actually some movement in the legislative session and with the agencies to move a stormwater rule forward. So my presentation is going to cover why we need a stormwater rule update, some of the overview, basically, of what we would like to see in that rule, and then what we see as the process moving forward. So I'm not going to talk too much about stormwater pollution sources because that's been covered quite a bit already. But what I do want to point out is that Southwest Florida does encompass all of these different sources, whether it's from agricultural runoff, whether it's from urban areas, wastewater treatment plants. All of these are covered in our area. And depending on the watershed, you can have a combination of them or a preponderance of one or the other. But today we're talking about stormwater as it pertains to the built environment, residential and commercial development in particular. So the first question we really need to address today is, why do we need an update to the stormwater rule? As Jim pointed out, and Jennifer and everybody else today, that we really do have a big problem with nutrient pollution in Florida. And stormwater transports excess nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which help feed harmful algal blooms. So how big of a problem is nutrient pollution? If you look at the assessments that DEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, does, over half of the water bodies that are looked at are considered not meeting their standards. And one of the top 3 sources of pollution are nutrients. The Conservancy also does a publication called the Estero Report Card, and we look at all of the different sources of pollution in Southwest Florida in particular. And nutrients, turns out it is the most prevalent of all the pollution in Southwest Florida. So, what does that mean for stormwater? We know that, the statewide stormwater rule, currently, what is it supposed to handle? Given what we talked about with the amount of stormwater and pollution that we have and nutrient pollution, what are we supposed to be achieving right now? Currently, we're supposed to be achieving 80% of a reduction in the amount of pollution that's coming into, that is leaving a stormwater system. And if that stormwater system happens to be discharging to an outstanding Florida water, like Estero Bay or one of Estero Bay's tributaries, for example, it's supposed to be reducing 95% of that discharge. It's also supposed to provide a net improvement to the discharge if it is discharging to an impaired or polluted waterway. And remember, we just talked about how many of those waterways in Florida are polluted. So we know that that is not actually being achieved at this point. So that's what the standards are supposed to do. What they actually do is that we've found out that for over a decade, we've known for over a decade that the current stormwater standards for development are not removing enough pollutants like nitrogen and phosphorus, or treating the necessary volume of water. So we've heard from Serge and several others about stormwater ponds, and They are often the most relied upon tool for stormwater management in developments. The problem with that is that, back in 2007, DEP actually did a study and hired a consultant to review the efficiencies of these stormwater management systems and design criteria. And this is what they found: that the existing stormwater design criteria fail to consistently meet either the 80% or the 95% goals. And wet detention, those stormwater ponds we were just talking about, can be expected to provide a net removal of approximately 20 to 40% for total nitrogen and 60 to 70% for total phosphorus. Now, those ranges exist because it can depend on how the stormwater pond is designed, its depth, the residence time of the water, how long that water is sitting in that pond before it's discharged. And because of that, is it any really big surprise that we have so many nutrient pollution problems in our area? So imagine Florida has been seeing booming development for decades. And for that entire time, we've been permitting and designing systems that are removing only a fraction of the amount of pollution that's being generated. So as Florida's population continues to grow, the more developments are going in with outdated standards, and the more we're falling farther and farther behind in addressing pollution from this particular source. So Jim said that, just in the Estero Bay watershed, we've had an increase in population of 41.5% just since 2000. So at this point, you're probably wondering why, if we've known for over a decade that these need to be updated, why are we still talking about it? Well, there was a draft statewide stormwater rule that was developed back in 2010, and many folks in this room were involved with that initiative. However, that rule was never finalized or adopted. But we do now have a strong opportunity going forward to ensure that that draft rule can be picked up, brushed off, updated, because things have changed even in the last decade, and ensure that we have the most updated stormwater rules. So what do we envision when we say we need an updated stormwater rule? At its boiled down essence, this is what we would need: updated design criteria for new development and redevelopment projects, and that each of these new projects retain and treat more water on site, getting to that stopping pollution at the source paradigm, and treat enough water that it is actually going to meet those statutorily required 80% and 95% reduction goals. A couple of the other things that we would like to see in an updated stormwater rule, and I can't go into every single one of them, but I did want to highlight that we need to have higher treatment requirements for discharges to impaired or polluted waters. We need to ensure that we're utilizing a treatment train approach to treating stormwater. So that would be a combination of different types of stormwater treatment. It could be pervious pavement and a wet detention pond and a swale. And one of the interesting new tools, and it's actually not as new as one would think, but it hasn't been implemented in that very many areas. It's in Alachua County and Pinellas County. It's called the BMP Trains model. So you can actually plug in a suite of different stormwater treatment options, and it will tell you what reduction percentages you will be getting by using that suite of options. And that allows you to tailor it based on the needs of your site and to get the very specific and higher nutrient reduction requirements that are needed. So what's next? Through, I think, the collective efforts of many stakeholders, we are actually starting to see movement on stormwater. Stormwater became one of the recommendations from the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. And we've also seen several bills filed this legislative session. One, which Senate Bill 712, directs the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to update their stormwater rules and to initiate that rulemaking by January of next year. There are other stormwater bills that are solely focused on stormwater. looking at some of that design criteria updates that I was talking about. So they get into more specifics on what would be seen in an update of stormwater rules. Regardless of which of these bills pass, where the rubber hits the road is in actually the rulemaking process. So what is included in the final rule that it's adopted, and that's where we need the engagement of everyone who cares about nutrient pollution and ensuring that we're stopping pollution at the source. This is a major issue for our region in particular, and as rulemaking efforts go forward, we really need to stay engaged to ensure that the updated rules are protective of our water resources and achieves the necessary nutrient reduction goals. So the Conservancy and many others will be engaged in Tallahassee throughout the legislative session, and we look forward to seeing rulemaking over the next year and seeing many of you there to help us meet this goal. So thank you for having me here today.